Hi and welcome back to my channel. This is Quest for Faith and my name is Brian. Today we're going to be hitting on a topic that for me was really appealing about the Catholic Church before I even really started diving into it. And that's kind of the topic of marriage. And more specifically, I'm kind of going to go into the role of a father and husband, the benefits of that, and also talking briefly about the role of a wife. So, hope you guys enjoy this. Please like, share, and subscribe, and let's dive into it. So it was just about 2 weeks ago. I was sitting in my house with no power, and little did I know it, I was going to wake up the next morning with no water. I live in the Dallas area, and we got hit with that snowstorm, and we were without power for almost 4 days, 3.5 probably. It flickered on and off a few times, but not long enough really to do anything except maybe cook some rice or heat the house up for a little bit. But it really kind of made me take stock of myself, what's really important to me, and it made me start thinking about my family, right? I mean, I spent 4 days in complete husband-dad mode on high alert, doing everything I could to keep my kids warm, my wife warm, to feed everybody. By the grace of God, we had enough food, and I had bought a generator, so we were able to run a few small appliances. So we weren't as bad off as other people, and it really makes you feel blessed when you start looking at when things you take for granted, like power and water, get taken away, and internet. So with that, I started kind of thinking of the role of the father, the role of being a dad and a husband, and thinking more of the Catholic Church's interpretation of what this is. And I remember when I was younger, I've never been once ever thinking I would ever get a divorce. And I remember always hearing people talk about how stupid it is, how the Catholic Church doesn't allow divorces and all this. But I think what people are misunderstanding with this is that the Catholic Church's interpretation of marriage is not just a marriage. It's a sacrament. Right? You hear people all the time talk about, well, I was called to be a priest. I was called to be a preacher. And so I went to the sacrament of the priesthood. You hear that. But you don't necessarily hear about people talk about marriage as a sacrament. And that's the level they put it up on, the Catholic Church does. And if you look on the Catholic Catechism, let me switch over here. So right here on, this is section 2, article 7, the Sacrament of Matrimony. And I think the main thing I want to point out here is, what's the purpose of this sacrament? Why is it so important? And it's right here this is the very beginning of it, and this goes on for pages and pages in the Catholic Catechism in this section here. Matrimonial covenant, by which a man and a woman establish between themselves a partnership of the whole of life, is by its nature ordered towards the good of the spouses and the procreation and education of offspring. The covenant between baptized persons has been raised by Christ the Lord to the dignity of a sacrament. You don't necessarily hear this. You might hear this in some mainline Protestant churches, but your typical Bible church, your typical non-denominational church is not lifting marriage up to the sacramental level. They're not giving it that big of a stand in the faith. So when the Catholic Church, when you get married in the Catholic Church, they look at it as if you're entering, just as if you're entering the priesthood, but you're entering marriage. And your duty as a married couple is to have children and educate them. And so, where am I going with this? So you hear a lot of stuff, and I was thinking about this as my role as a husband and father. And you read in the New Testament and the Old Testament, there's a number of examples of a father. And one of the key things you see is the father's the head of the household. And this is just, I Googled this up, and I don't know, where is this? openbibleinfo.com. But it just pulled up a number of verses talking about a man's role, or a husband's role, as the leader of his family. So when you enter the sacrament of marriage, it's not something to take lightly, because you are taking on the responsibility of being the spiritual leader of your wife and any children that you have. It's now your job to lead them. And when you read through a lot of these, I find it interesting. So First Timothy has a number of things in there. First Corinthians has a bunch of stuff. You have that whole verse. Is this the one? Yeah, let's drop down. Where is it? I thought I had it separated out there. But what I want to, this is it, First Corinthians. But I want you to understand, the head of every man is Christ, and the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. So it's kind of putting you in that structural hierarchy. Oh, there it is. It's right up top. That's the verse I wanted to read out. Christ is the head of you, and you're duty bound to lead your wife and children to Christ. And it goes further down here when you look at First Timothy, that he must manage his household well with dignity, keeping the children submissive. And I know there's a lot of people that get upset today when they're reading verses like this, like, I do not permit a woman to teach, to exercise authority over a man, rather she is to remain silent. But let's read this in the whole context of what it actually says, right? It's fascinating when you start thinking about the role of your wife. Your wife is your rock. And that's even how these scriptures are painting this out, right? She's the example. And even down here, I think it's in 1 Peter, likewise, wives, be subject to your husbands, so that if they do not obey the word, which is mean they're not Christians, they don't follow the word, that they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives. So what Scripture is telling us, and the Catholic Church is also saying, is that wives, you're the example also of how to live a holy spiritual life. And that you can influence your husbands. And I think about this, and my wife was, God bless her. I mean, I married an amazing woman. But this is really how she turned my head around. If you haven't watched my conversion story of joining the Catholic Church, I'll put a link in the description right up there. But I mean, she just constantly was leading by example in her own ways that constantly showed me that, man, I'm not doing my husbandly duties. I'm not being the head of the household. I am not being the spiritual leader that I should be. And it took her a while. It took me a while to wake up, but I came around. Am I great? No. But I understand it now, and especially more after understanding the Catholic stance on marriage and a husband's role and a wife's role of the importance of my duties. And when I'm looking at this, there's some other interesting things too. And this goes along with some other stuff I'm going to talk about here in a second. But there's been studies on when you have children, right? So the Catholic Catechism right there in the beginning, it says to procreation and education of offspring, right? So that's where it starts off saying. And there's some interesting studies that I've heard. And I was trying to find them. I wanted to show them because I really do like showing, like, hey, this is where I got this. Do your own research. But they've done studies on children that with varying degrees of participation in their spiritual life between the parents, right? So they say if just the mom is the one taking the kids to mass every Sunday, taking the kids to church, praying all the time, being that saintly, godly woman, the chances of your children staying in the Catholic Church or even just Christian or practicing Christian is about 33%, about 30%, somewhere in that range. Flip it, say it's just the dad that's the one going to mass every Sunday. He's the one taking them to church all the time. He's praying every night. He's trying to live a holy life. Do you think it jumps up to 50%? No, it pops all the way up to 83% chance of your kids staying in the Catholic Church, staying Christians, period. I mean, that's really what you almost have to worry about today because atheism's totally on the rise. And what's the numbers if it's both parents? You got an 86% chance of your kids staying Catholic. So just those numbers alone stress the importance of the father being the spiritual leader for the household. You know, I have two boys, and so they're always trying to do everything that I do. So it's really made me look at my behaviors, language I use, but also the way I practice my faith. I make sure they see me reading the Bible. I make sure that they see me praying the rosary. I want them to know that this is an important thing in my life. That it's just not something we do on Sundays and then we're done. And I think that's very important for us men to understand. And not to say that women's roles aren't important, because they are. I mean, it says that in the scriptures. Women are still very important in this relationship. I mean, heck, even when in 1 Corinthians, when he's talking about marriage and sex, you know, everyone stops at that line where a woman's body belongs, what does it say? A woman's body belongs to a man. What's the very next line? Same thing in reverse. The man's body belongs to the woman. It's a partnership. But the man has to take the lead in how he conducts himself in being that spiritual leader for the household. And I kind of knew this about the Catholic Church, and I really admired it because I wasn't hearing this stuff be preached or talked about in Protestant churches I was going to. And this is what's fascinating. So then you look, let's kind of dive back into the catechism here. There's a whole section on the catechism on families and responsibilities and duties of parents. And this is so true. Because I think a lot of people today, and I think a lot of issues we have in the church, is because parents aren't taking this seriously. So right up here in 22:21, it says, the role of the parents in educating is of such importance that it is almost impossible to provide an adequate substitution. Let me read that again. The role of parents in education is of such importance that it is impossible to provide an adequate substitution. I think today, the way our society is set up, especially here in America, I can't speak for Europe. I've never lived there. Actually been there. But it's set up where the schools educate our kids. And then we make sure our kids go to religious ed. And we think it's done. We're good. But what is the data telling us? What is the Bible telling us? What is the Catholic Church screaming about the sacrament of marriage, the role of the father, the role of the mother in the lives of their children? That there is no adequate substitute for the education of our children. We can't rely on other people to educate our kids. And I know this can be intimidating, and I think I could see how this can be intimidating, especially if you have older children. But start educating yourself. Start understanding your faith. Start reading the Catholic Catechism along with the Bible. Read the Bible over and over again. Start looking at different websites, YouTube channels, different things to start hearing your faith. And so you can turn and start educating your children and figure out how to communicate that to them. So again, this just kind of came to me because I went into total husband leading dad role hardcore for 4 days with no power, right? And it really kind of translated for me, being the year of Saint Joseph. I felt like this would be a good video to do, and I hope this inspires you. I hope this gives you presence of mind to start taking that lead. If you're not being an active participant in your kids' religious education period, because our schools are not giving our kids any, most people don't even understand what their kids are being taught on a daily basis. But get involved. Be that leader. Women, be that constant presence, that constant support. Because you can't do it alone. You got to do it together. That's why it's a holy sacrament. It's unbelievably beautiful. So with that, that's it. So I hope hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And I'll talk to y'all later. Have a good one.